Hello and welcome. Today's lesson is going to be about solving quadratic equations by factoring. Before we do the lesson, we'd like to talk about perfect squares. So anytime I take a whole number like 1 squared equals 1, 2 squared equals 4, 3 squared equals 9, these numbers right here is what is called perfect squares because when I take the square root, they're going to give me back the whole number. So square root of 100 is 10, square root of 121 is 11. So these are important numbers to remember and have it memorized, okay? So now the reason why this is important is because whenever you have polynomials like this ones right here that we've seen before, and in before we would add a 0x right here and solve it by multiplying this times this and creating the list. Well, there's a shortcut. Whenever you see that you have a number which is squared, x squared right here, and you notice that this is a perfect square minus another perfect square, you can take a shortcut by writing two sets of parentheses, and then you're going to write a minus and a positive, and then you just take the square root of the first, so square root of 25x squared will be 5x, and the square root of 16 is 4. And then on the second parenthesis, just copy the same terms, 5x plus 4. And that's it. Let's try this one. Right here, I notice that this is a perfect square because this is a 1. And on the end, I have 49. So it's also a perfect square. So I go ahead and open parentheses. And the other reason that it works is because it has a negative right there. So you know that you're going to put a minus and a positive right there. And you're going to take the square root of the first. So it would be 1x. And square root of the second would be a 7. And then you repeat the same terms on the second parenthesis, 1x plus 7. Let's look at this one right here. Open two sets of parentheses. Put a positive, a negative and a positive. And then you take the square root of the first, which would be 6x, and square root of the second, which would be 1. So this would be 6x plus 1. And there we go. On the last one, again, we open two sets of parentheses. And square root of the first would be 8x minus the square root of the second would be 11. And this would be 8x plus 11. And there you go. Okay, so now we're going to proceed to the lesson today, which is solving equations by factoring. And the difference between the problems that we did before is that now we have equations. So you're going to see an equal sign. And the key in order to solve by factoring is that you have to have one side equals 0. So in this problem right here, we started out with something already equals 0. So basically we ask, okay, you only have two terms. Can I factor anything from 4 and 14? Remember, if you don't remember, or you cannot think about the number that divides 4 and 14, click on Functions, click on Miscellaneous, click on GCD, and then type it in 4, 14. And the calculator will help you decide that is the biggest number to be 2. And also you can factor out an x. And now that you know what you can factor, open parentheses, 4 divided by 2 is a 2. X squared divided by x is an x. And then negative 14 divided by 2 is negative 7. And x divided by x, it cancels out. So then equals 0. All right, now that we have this, we're going to break these numbers into two parts. 2x, we're going to set it equals 0. And then we're going to do the 2x minus 7 also equals 0. Okay, the reason why we're doing this is because let's think for a second. Let's say we have two numbers. Okay, and we're multiplying these two numbers, and we know that when we multiply these two numbers, this is equals 0. Well, there's three things that could happen. The first number is 0, and maybe the second number is another number other than 0. So, but still, the answer is going to be 0. Or maybe the first number is not 0, but the second number is 0. Okay, so that could happen. Or it could be that the, both numbers that we don't know equal 0. And that way, 0 times 0 equals 0. So whenever we have something like this, we have 2x times 2x minus 7, we're saying that three things could happen. This guy here, the 2x could be 0. The one 2x minus 7 could also be 0. Or one of them is 0 and the other one isn't. So that's why we're setting it up like this, okay? So in summary, whenever you have something like this, you're going to break it down and set it both sides equals to 0. So let me see, erase this. And then what do we do after that? After we set it equals to 0? Well, we're going to solve it. We're going to get the x alone. So in this case here, we're going to divide both sides by 2, and we find out that x equals 0. On this one here, we're going to move the 7 to the other side. So it'll be 2x equals 7. And we're going to divide by 2. And when we try to divide on the calculator, we're probably going to get a decimal. So let's take a look. 7 divided by 2 is a 3.5. Let's change it back to a fraction. So the fraction reduced to be 7 over 2. And there we go. So for this particular problem, we have two possible answers, x equals 0 or x equals 7 over 2. Let's try the next problem. The next problem, if you notice, we have an equation, but it's not equal 0. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to send the 11m to the other side. So that way this side is going to be equal 0. Now when we send the 11m, we want to put the 11m right in the middle because we want to make sure that the equation is written in standard form. Remember standard form, you start with the biggest exponent. So in this case, it would be 3m squared. Then the 11 is going to come in as negative 11m. And then we bring down the 42. And now this side equals 0. And now I can solve by factoring. If you remember, we multiplied the first term times the last. So 3 times 42, and 3 times 42 is 126. And now we need to create a list of numbers that give me 126. So we're going to here to the calculator and we click y equals 126 divided by x. Once we've written that, we click on the wheel, we click the table, and then we go to where it says number 2, and we click many times to produce the next few numbers on the list. Now we start the list starting with 1, so 1 and 126, 2 and 63, 3 and 42, 4 doesn't work because it's a decimal, 5 also doesn't work because it's a decimal. Then we have 6 and 21, 7 and 18, 8 doesn't work. Then we have 9 and 14. Since the numbers have not started to repeat, we're going to continue the list. So click next to the 9, and we click enter, 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 enter. And we notice the next number on the list to give me a whole number is 14 and 9, but we notice that 14 is already on the list. So we know that we have come to the end of the list. Now we're going to focus our attention to the middle term, which in this case is number 11. And we're going to ask, is there any pairs over here that if I add or subtract will give me 11? And the answer is yes. I have a pair of numbers. 18 minus 7 give me 11. So now we'll look at the sign. The sign of the middle term is a negative, so that tells me the biggest here, 18, is negative. And now you ask yourself, okay, if I have negative 18 and I have a 7, would the 7 have to be positive or negative to produce a negative 11? Well, it would have to be positive because positive 7 minus 18 gives me negative 11. Now, final check. You look at the last sign right there. It is a negative. And you ask yourself, does a negative times a positive give me a negative? Yes, it does. So that means this candidate is the correct candidate for this problem. That means this candidate will work. All we have to do is bring down the first term. We rewrite the middle term using these numbers that we found. with their sign, so plus positive 7m and negative 18m. And then we bring down the last term, which is negative 42, and we set it equal to 0. Perfect. Now that we have these, we're going to pair them up just like we did before. And we're going to ask yourselves, what is the biggest number to divide 3 and 7? And if you cannot think of it, go back to GCD and enter those two numbers, 3, 7. And the calculator tells us that the biggest number that divides 3 and 7 is 1. And we notice that we can also factor it an m. So we're going to do 3 divided by 1 is 3. M squared divided by m is m. 7 divided by 1 is 7. And m divided by m, it cancels out. We're going to bring down the sign. And then we're going to ask ourselves, what is the biggest number to divide 18 and 42? Again, our calculator will help us. 18, 42. Whoops, let me delete those extra numbers and make sure it has a parenthesis. Here we go. So 18, 42 produces a 6. So we know that we can factor out a 6 from 18 and 42. Can we factor out an m? No, we can't because the 42 does not have an m. So we open parentheses, 18m, negative 18m divided by negative 6 is positive 3m. And negative 42 divided by negative 6 is positive 7. Now equals 0. Now we open two sets of parentheses. On the first set, it's going to go, what do they have in common? They have in common 3m plus 7. And on the second parenthesis, first we're going to remove what they have in common. And on the second parenthesis is what we have left, which in this case is 1m minus 6. And there we go. We're ready for the next step, which is to break this down. So basically, we're going to separate. We're going to take the first term and we're going to set it equal to 0. And we're going to take the second term and do the same. Now we're going to solve for the letter m. So in the first one, we're going to send the 7 to the other side. So it'll be negative 7. And then we're going to divide both sides by 3. And by dividing in the calculator, let's take a look, see what we get. So we have negative 7 divided by 3. We get a decimal. Click on the circle. Calculator tells us the reduced fraction, it will be negative 7/3. So that's our first answer, negative 7/3. In the second answer, we're going to move the 6 to the other side. So this would be 1m equals positive 6. Now, if you remember, 1 times m is the same thing as writing m. So that means you can erase the m or leave it the 1. You can erase the 1s and leave it invisible. So basically, we say that m equals 6. Okay. Notice that you could also have done this. 1m equals 6. And then divide both sides by 1. M equals 6. Okay. But I'm taking the shortcut by saying that 1m is the same thing as m. So I finalize it right there. M equals 6. So there you go. On this problem, we have two answers, negative 7/3 and m equals 6. All right, let's go to the next two examples. On the next example, again, I don't have a 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send these two numbers to the other side. So that means I'm going to bring down the negative y squared. I'm going to bring down the 4y. And I'm going to bring down the 35. I'm also going to send the 8y to the other side. So it becomes positive 8y. And the negative 2 as well is going to become positive 2y squared. And I'm going to set it equal to 0 because now everything moves. So I'm left with 0. And that's exactly what I want. Now I'm going to combine the y squares. So this will be 1y squared. Then I'm going to combine the numbers with y. So 4 plus 8 is 12y. And 35, we're going to bring it down. There we go. Equals 0. Now we're ready to do the procedure to find factoring, the factors. Okay, so 1 times 35 equals 35. We're going to go to the calculator and we're going to go ahead and use the table that we already built for the previous problem. Just going to go up here and we're going to click on the 126 and we're going to change that to 35. Then click the blue area and right there is my new table. So the numbers that give me 35 is 1 and 35. 2 does not work. 3 does not work. 4 does not work. The next one that works is 5 and 7. And then 6 doesn't work. And the next number is 7, but 7 is already part of the list. Now I focus my attention on the middle term. The middle term is number 12. And I ask myself, what pair of numbers here give me 12? In that case, would be 7 and 5. 7 and 5, if you add them together, gives you 12. So now look at the sign. The sign of 12 is positive, so that means the biggest one here will have to be positive. And if 7 is positive, what does 5 have to be to give me a 12? It has to be positive as well. Then the final check. A positive times a positive gives you a positive? Yes, it does. So that confirms to me that this pair of numbers will work. We're just going to bring down the 1y squared right there. We're going to rewrite 12y using 5y plus 7y. And we're going to bring down the 35. And then set everything equals to 0. Now that we have that, we're going to pair them up. And we're going to ask ourselves, what is the biggest number to divide 1 and 5? If you cannot think of it, you can always ask the calculator by using GCD 1, 5, and problem tells us that the biggest number to divide 1 and 5 is 1. We can also factor out a y. So 1y squared divided by 1y is 1y. 5y divided by 5y is positive 5. We bring down the positive and we ask again our GCD friend, 7 and 35. What is the biggest number to divide 7 and 35? And the answer is 7. Very well, we put a 7 there. We cannot factor out a y, so we're going to open parentheses and do 7y divided by 7 is 1y, and 35 divided by 7 is 5, equals 0. All right, perfect. Now we'll look at what they have in common. They have in common y plus 5. And if I remove that, we're left with 1y plus 7 equals 0. Now we're going to break them apart. So this would be y plus 5 equals 0. And here we're going to have y plus 7 equals 0. Notice that I don't have to write the 1 because the 1 can be invisible. And we're going to send the 5 to the other side. So y equals negative 5. That's one of our answers. And then here we're going to move the 7 to the other side. And y equals negative 7. Here we go. Perfect. The answer is right there. Okay. Very good. Remember, you can stop the video at any time and have me repeat as many times as you need to understand this topic. Okay. Our last problem. So let me draw a line right here. This is from the previous problem. And on this one, I have two terms equals 0. And I notice that I have a minus, and I notice that these two guys are perfect squares. So what that means, I can use that shortcut that we talked about at the beginning of this lesson. We open two sets of parentheses, we put a minus and a positive, and then we take the square root of each term. So square root of 36x squared is 6x, and square root of 49 would be a 7. So that means on the other parentheses, I will also have 6x plus 7. All right, and then all I have to do is break them apart. So this would be 6x minus 7 equals 0. And this would be 6x plus 7 equals 0. Now to get the x alone, I move the 7 to the other side, so it'll be 6x, whoops, 6x equals positive 7. And then the last step is to divide both sides, so we divide both sides by 6. And we call our friend calculator to help us out. So we're going to do 7 divided by 6, so 7 divided by 6. Calculator gives us 7/6. So that means that stays the same. So there we go. So 7/6, that's one of our answers. And then for the other answer, we're going to do the similar thing. We're going to send the 7 on the other side. 6x equals -7. We're going to divide both sides by 6. X equals, let's check it out. Put a negative right there in front of the 7. And it doesn't do much change, so it gives us -7/6. So there we go. That's the answer for this problem. All right, so this concludes this lesson. These problems should help you do the assignment. Thank you very much for your time. Have a great day, and bye-bye.